Did you or anyone else at your organisation investigate this at the time?
No.
Can you explain why?
I didn't know of it. I'd never heard of him. I can't answer. I don't know. I haven't heard that, but that is the first I've heard of that.
So none of you...
What can we also say about the media coverage of these hearings and the scandal overall? Joining me to discuss this is the founder and president of Brave New Films, Robert Greenwald. Robert, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now, before we get into some of these details, I want to play a clip of the first words that we heard uttered from Rupert Murdoch's mouth.
I would just like to say one sentence. This is the most humble day of my life.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I saw a lot of snarky comments, let's put it that way, all over Twitter yesterday as everybody was watching this live. But what do you think we learned about Rupert Murdoch, the man, yesterday?
Well, I got a lot of comments on my Twitter feed and my Facebook page and on our websites. I think we learned a lot, and I don't know where to begin and don't want to take 4 hours to talk about everything we learned. First of all, just think about it, just the language. He didn't start by saying, I'm sorry. He didn't start by saying we've done a terrible thing. He didn't start by saying I will correct this. He said it was the most humble day of his life. I would hope when he came out at birth was maybe a more humble day than yesterday was for him. But we also saw throughout the hearings and throughout the testimony, both he and his son essentially ducking any of the answers of substance that have to be asked and the questions that have to be questioned. Hopefully, it will increase the pressure to have hearings in the United States.
Well, what do you think are those questions of substance that need to be asked and that we need an answer for?
Well, there's a series of them. First of all, it's the question of what did they know, when did they know it, how did they deal with it, which they essentially ducked around. Secondly, who authorized significant numbers of dollars? Thirdly, this is a top-down company. As we found out when we did Out Fox, they create memos, written memos, telling their news people what to respond to and how to respond. It's impossible to believe that a company who has lost 16% of its value in its stock is not on the case and the head people are not deeply focused on this. And then to go on, what about the payoffs? What about paying the legal bills for people who've been convicted of crimes? What about the fact that the lawyers they've engaged asked them for permission to speak to the press so that they could clarify things, and they refused that permission? What's gone on in the United States? The list goes on, and then there are the lawsuits. There are the lawsuits from stockholders who are suing them now about paying too much, $675 million for his daughter's company. And then Michael Tomasky has a very good piece in the Beast today, talking about the fact that, in fact, there is legal action that could be taken against Murdoch.
Well, there definitely seem to be a lot of shady dealings there, a lot of goings on that we haven't quite gotten all of the full details about. But yes, there were payoffs here. There were people who simply ignored the problem, didn't want to investigate it. And at the same time, we keep hearing people say that, well, we knew this was going on for years, but for some reason, when it was celebrity phone calls or phones that were being hacked, it wasn't a big deal until finally it was something that could pull on the heartstrings of everybody. It was a young girl who had gone missing and turns out was murdered. But why has it been okay all of this time?
Well, I don't think it's okay. I think it's a question. We live in a culture that's an attention deficit disorder culture. How do you get people's attention, number one? And then, people certainly around the world are suffering with profound problems in terms of their daily life, their ability to take care of their family or make a living. So they're not so concerned about policy the way you and I might be and others might be. They're concerned about survival. Well, hacking that dead girl's phone machine really got to people and understood here is a corporation that would stop at nothing. And it kind of became like the poster child for their bad behavior. And now they began to understand and ask questions and say, wait a minute, This is the same corporation that every single one of his newspapers was leading the charge to war in Iraq, which was a war that responded in, thousands and thousands of people being killed. This is the same corporation that is the communications arm of the Tea Party. And, it goes on. But this symbol and this terrible thing that they did, this young girl's phone answering machine, has allowed people to focus and to ask the questions. Now it's all of our job to make sure that it's understood this is what happens with media consolidation. This is what happens, one man, one corporation dominating the media and intimidating the politicians in Britain and in the United States.
But I think that, you hit upon a point there, which is the sense that, unfortunately, this is what the readers, this is what audiences wanted as well, right? Perhaps as an escape from some of their real problems. I bet Murdoch would tell you that this was just a business, and that's why they are being successful. So whether or not, obviously, there has been an investigation launched by the FBI into whether some of this was going on here in the U.S. regarding 9/11 victims. But do you think that these hearings that we're having, these investigations, are actually going to bring any of these practices to a halt? Or maybe 10 years from now, is the U.S. media culture going to be just as tabloidy as it is in the U.K. right now?
Well, depends on what time of day you ask me that question, whether I'm in optimistic mode or pessimistic mode. But I think that certainly in the UK, there are going to be a series of investigations. There are going to be substantive. There was an inquiry today that released a report saying that the Murdochs were refusing to cooperate, which will keep the pressure on. And I think they're in for several years over there. I think in that country, it will definitely help change policy. And the obscene connection between the elected officials and the NewsCorp, the dinners, the dining, the visits, the families, the giving money up and back, all of that I think will unravel. What I hope will happen, though, is using this example that will come to the United States, there will be an investigation, and people will begin to understand that in many ways Rupert Murdoch has had more effect on their lives than any of our presidents. His ideology, his conservative belief, his using his newspapers and television to aggressively advocate, that's something that has taken a toll on all of us, on all of our media, and therefore on all of our democracy.
Well, speaking of some of his newspapers advocating for things, the Wall Street Journal penned an unsigned op-ed last Sunday, essentially coming in a bit of to a defense about themselves, saying that it's not fair that every News Corp journalist now falls under this umbrella. They attacked the New York Times, The Guardian, they attacked ProPublica, and they attacked them by comparing this phone hacking scandal to WikiLeaks, saying how dare those organizations that publish documents made public by WikiLeaks actually have something to say here. What do you think of that comparison?
Well, I think if Mr. Murdoch or any one of his entities is signing your paycheck, you really need to think very long and very carefully before you go out and hurt the values that newspapers and journalists are brought up with. Sadly, many journalists, ones over there and here, and some who work at the various decent newspapers, have had their integrity questioned and compromised. And it's going to take a while for that to be restored, if it's going to be restored. But one would hope that some of the reporters at the Wall Street Journal would adhere to the great tradition of that newspaper and go out and investigate. I can't imagine that happening, but I would hope that would happen.
So maybe they're just trying to cover their own backs because journalists don't investigate anymore, so now we have to depend on WikiLeaks to disclose many stories. And so in essence, they're just trying to bring the blame all the way back around. It's a vicious circle. Robert Greenwald, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.